Trump orbiters are musing about the possibility of mandatory military service should the former president and Republican presidential nominee get elected for another term. I knew that there was gonna be some chatter about this eventually, because there is an issue with the military and its failure to recruit people to the military. And so eventually I knew that some politicians or some federal bureaucrats were gonna start thinking about whether maybe they should pass some legislation making the service mandatory. But let's get to the details. Let's get to who is at the center of this. It's a man by the name of Christopher Miller, who actually led the Pentagon at the tail end of the Trump administration, so Trump's first term. Miller detailed his vision for the United States military as part of something I'm sure many of you have already heard of. It's known as Project 2025. It's basically the Heritage Foundation's game plan for the country, legislatively speaking, should Donald Trump get elected for another term. And so Miller is a highly influential individual within conservative circles, and he is in fact likely to serve in the State Department under Trump again, should Trump get elected. Now, Miller is among a cluster of influential former administration officials and GOP lawmakers who have mused aloud about a national service mandate and other measures to remedy what they see as a crisis facing the all-volunteer military. Trump has signaled that Miller, if there is a second term, might reprise his role as defense secretary, a powerful cabinet post with sway over Pentagon policy. So what exactly would Miller do should he have the power to do it? He's actually very clear on some of his suggestions here. So one of the things he would do is require public high school students to take something known as the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. It's also known as ASVAB, literally. So the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery is basically a standardized test to measure a potential recruit's skills to see where they might fit in within the military, right? It's just a way of assessing an individual to see what they would be qualified to do if they entered the military. And it's based on skills and intellect. Now, by the way, I should note, there are 900 public high schools that are already having their students take this test. It is not mandatory. It is meaning the schools don't have to do it. No one's forcing the schools to do it. But about 900 schools have chosen to make their high school students take this test.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
So in response to a Freedom of Information Act request, that's how we learned that 900 schools across the nation were implementing that test. The Washington Post reached out to the State Department to see if they can get like updated numbers on that, but the State Department refused to share those numbers. So if we want updated numbers, they're gonna have to do another FOIA request. Now, under Miller's plan, he said the ASVAB, again, that's the standardized test, would be used to identify potential military weaknesses and help plug knowledge gaps as US defense leaders size up competitors like China and devise plans for possible conflicts with a range of foreign adversaries. And that's the other thing. I'm glad that China came up in this reporting, because make no mistake about it, both administrations, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, have ramped up the adversarial rhetoric toward China. And so as we inch closer and closer to, we're already kind of in a Cold War with China, but if it ever escalates to a hot war, God forbid, that would be a disaster. We're not in a good position right now, given the lack of military recruits to deal with that. So I've wondered, what is the government really thinking as they continue to engage in all of this, rhetoric and all of these, honestly, some political actions against countries like China. And so for people like Miller, he's thinking about making mandatory military service a policy here in the United States. The other thing he wants to do is grant military recruiters even more access to secondary schools so they can essentially propagandize teenagers to join the military. And by the way, they've already loosened some of the restrictions on that, but Miller wants to do more to loosen those restrictions. And he also wants to stop using, get a load of this, the Defense Department's electronic medical records platform, saying that, quote, it leads to unnecessary delays and unwarranted rejections for some people with disabilities and other conditions who otherwise want to serve. Now, look, it really depends on what the disability is here, but it really seems to me that because they're having a difficult time with finding people who want to be in the military, or more importantly, people who qualify to be part of the military, they want to lower standards a little bit. And there is a problem here, okay? So the military pointed to internal data indicating that a whopping 71% of America's youth today do not qualify for military service due to obesity, drug use, aptitude. And so this is the decay of the American empire. And I'm not saying that to insult the people within the country. I'm saying that because what I just listed, the obesity, drug use, aptitude, I feel that yes, while there's an element of personal responsibility involved, overall, these are symptoms of a country that is run by a broken government, a government that has neglected its citizens, a Congress that is far more interested in fattening up their own pockets rather than serving the best interests of the constituents who elected them into elected office in the first place. So this is the chickens coming home to roost. And rather than getting to the root causes of why we have these epidemics in the country, you have Miller thinking about just forcing people to be in the military regardless. And I mean, if they're not qualified because of these issues, how is it going to make sense to force them to be in the military when they're not qualified to be in the military? None of that is addressed by what Miller wants to do here. Now, to be fair, collectively, the military services fell short of the Pentagon's recruiting goal by about 41,000 people last year. That's what officials told lawmakers in December. Only the Marines and the Space Force met their objectives. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be that maybe Americans don't trust the government when it comes to deciding which wars we're going to engage in? People are paying attention. You know, I remember after 9/11, people who joined the military, and there was a giant influx of Americans who were like, no, I want to protect my country. So they joined the military. And then after that, you know, our men and women were deployed multiple times to the Middle East. Many of them died as a result. Many of them came back home injured, either physically or mentally. And then they were neglected by our government. How many homeless veterans do we have? So if the government is concerned with the lack of recruits, there are so many issues that need to be addressed, including the treatment of our soldiers, the treatment of our veterans, the foreign policy decisions that our government makes based on the, corrupt interests who influence them. I mean, it's just hilarious to me that they just want to do this by force because Americans have totally realized what's going on here, how they've been used and abused in the military for all sorts of weird political goals that don't really make much sense. And so let's get to Trump. Because at first, when this report came out, Trump himself hadn't said anything to the Washington Post. He didn't offer them any type of comment, but he did post something this morning that gave me a little bit of relief. Okay, so let's go to his Truth Social post. He wrote, quote, "The fake news Washington Post came up with the ridiculous idea that Donald J. Trump will call for mandatory military service. At no point in the piece did they say that Trump will call for mandatory military service. They specifically focused on an individual that Trump had in his administration and is likely to have in his administration again, Christopher Miller, but I'll continue. This is only a continuation of their 8-year failed attempt to damage me with the voters. The story is completely untrue. In fact, I never even thought of that idea. Only a degenerate former newspaper, which has lost 50% of its readers, would fabricate such a tale." Okay, so you guys get the point. He says he's not in favor of this. And while Trump is known to be deceptive. He's known to lie. I actually believe him on this because everything that Trump decides to do always goes back to what's best for Trump. Mandatory military service would be so deeply unpopular, and it would be deeply unpopular with his own base, especially the America First MAGA crowd, okay, that have completely soured on some of our military interventions, which I think is a good development for the most part. So I don't think that he would pursue something that he knows would really upset his base and overall the American people. And I think, just as is the case with the falling birth rates, I don't think it makes sense to force people to have kids. You want to make the conditions better. You want to incentivize people to do it, right? I think the same is true of the military. If you want more recruits, I think the government better smarten up in regard to how we treat soldiers, how we treat veterans, in what kind of decisions are made in regard to foreign policy. And maybe give Americans a reason to want to serve this country, right? Because when you have a government that doesn't serve us, we're not gonna wanna serve it. You get what I'm saying? So I thought this was a fascinating piece. It's also important to know, who runs around in Trump circles, but it's also important to know that it doesn't seem like Trump would really be in favor of this. We'll see.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. We also love it if you hit the join button below because that makes you a member, and members allow us to be independent, honest. We can be as progressive as we want, no corporate media influence, and that's all because of you guys. We love doing the show with our members. Hit the join button, become one of the Young Turks.